In this lesson, we're going to be introducing Git. So the official definition is that Git is a distributed version control system. In other words, it's a way to keep track of all the versions of your project, and it can be used to collaborate with other people. So these are the two main features of Git. It's good for collaboration and for tracking the history of your work. So Git is a program that exists locally on your computer. Many people get confused thinking that Git and GitHub are basically the same thing. But this is a misunderstanding. They are two different things. So as we mentioned, Git is a program that exists on your computer, while GitHub is a company that provides hosting for projects using Git. This is so that you can host your projects on a remote server. In other words, you can host your projects that use Git on GitHub. So if we visit github.com, we can see that you can sign up to make an account on GitHub, and then you can host your projects that use Git on GitHub. So that's the difference between Git and GitHub. We will talk more about GitHub in a later section in the course, but for now we're going to focus on Git. So to quickly overview, in this lesson we covered what is Git and the difference between GitHub and Git. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one. In this lesson, we're going to go over using the terminal and installing Git. Depending on what computer you have, Git may or may not be pre-installed. But even if you already have Git installed, you may have an old version and you may want to update to the latest version. Throughout this lesson, I'm going to be using the Finder window and the terminal. The Finder window is probably quite a familiar place for most people, but the terminal may be new, so I'm just going to quickly introduce it. So the terminal is a place where you type in commands and make things happen on your computer or see information. When you first open up the terminal, it's going to look something like this. At the very top, you have the prompt, and it's made out of three parts: the name of your computer, where you are in the file system, and the name of your user, followed by a $, and then a space where you can write commands. At the moment, we're in the home folder in our file system, and that's represented by this squiggly line. So the first command that we're going to use is git -- version. This is going to tell us whether we have Git installed and which version we have installed. Another really helpful command that I'm going to be using is clear. This one just clears my terminal screen. So let's quickly see all of this in the terminal. So we can see that we're in the Finder window and we're in the home folder. And in the terminal, I'm also in the home folder. And I've actually simplified my prompt in order to just keep things more simple. Now I'm going to type in git -- version. And we can see here that my Git version is 2.23.0. Now I'll type in clear, and it clears my terminal screen. So in my case, I already have Git installed. But if you don't have Git installed, or if you want to update to the latest version, it's really easy to do. You simply have to go to the git-scm.com website. Then you go to the downloads, and you simply download the right version for your computer. So that's how you install Git. Just to quickly overview, in this lesson we covered what the terminal is and installing Git. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one. In this lesson, we're going to go over preparing the Git settings. So if it is your first time working with Git, there is one more thing you have to do before you start working on your first project using Git. You want to set the name and email of your user in the configuration file or settings file. This is important because when you look at your project history, you will want to know who made which changes. But before we do this, let me introduce some other commands. So the ls command is a command that lists all the files in a folder. Let's see this in action. So we are in the Finder and we can see all the files in the Finder, and also in the terminal we can see we're in the home folder and we type in ls, and now the files that we see in the terminal should be the same ones that are in the Finder window on the left-hand side. But these are all normal files, and there's another kind of file called a hidden file. Hidden files are files whose file name starts with a dot. In order to see them in the Finder, you have to press Command-Shift-Dot. And in order to see them in the terminal, you type in the ls command with the -a option. So in the Finder, you have to press Command-Shift-Dot, and then you can see all the hidden files that are grayed out. On the other hand, in the terminal, you have to type in ls-a, and here you can see once again all the hidden files. So now we covered how to see normal files and hidden files, but there's one hidden file in particular that I want to point out. So here you can see that we have a file called .gitconfig. Let's open it up. We can see that there's nothing in there. All it says is this is Git's per user configuration file. Now the next thing that I want to do is actually set the name and email for the user for our Git. So in order to do this, we're going to use a command, gitconfig. So the gitconfig command lets you see and set the Git options or settings. So in order to see them, you will write gitconfig and then the name of the option you want to see. And in order to set them, you will write gitconfig -- global, the name of the option, and the value that you want to give it. So let's see this in action. So first we're going to type in gitconfig user.name. So that's the name of the option, and we can see that there's nothing there. Now if we type in gitconfig -- global user.name and pass in the value, we've set the value. So now if we type in gitconfig user.name again, we can see that it gives us this value. And now if we open up the .gitconfig file, we can see that it set the name for our user. Now let's do the same for email. Gitconfig -- global user.email and then pass in the value. And now if we open the .gitconfig file once again, we can see that now the email is set as well. So that was how to set the username and the email so that when we use Git, we know who made which changes. To quickly overview, in this lesson, we covered how to set the name and email we want to use with Git. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one. In this lesson, I'm going to go over making our project directory. So if we want to start working with Git, first we need to have a project folder or a project directory that we will actually track with Git. A directory is simply another term for folder, so I will be using these two terms interchangeably. So let's see how we would normally create a folder in the Finder. We would probably right-click, create a new folder, and pass it a name. Here I'm calling it Git Learning Journey. But in order to do the same thing in the terminal, we have to use a command. And the command we use is mkdir, which stands for make directory, and then we pass in the name of the directory that we want to create. So let's see this in action. Let's first go and delete the folder we just created in the Finder. And then we go into the terminal. In the terminal, we can see that we're in the home folder, and that's where our folder will be created. And we type in mkdir, and then the name that we want the directory to have, Git Learning Journey. And what we just saw on the left-hand side is that our project directory was just created. So we've created our project directory, and you may notice that I've used camel case in order to give it the name. And that means there's no spaces and each subsequent word, the first letter is capitalized. Now I did this because in the terminal splits the arguments you write by the white spaces. So if I'd gone in and wrote an mkdir git learning journey, including the white spaces, we can see that it would have made 3 different folders, each with one of the words. So I just quickly wanted to point that out. So now we've created our project folder and we want to see how we can go into that project folder. So in the Finder, how I would normally go into a folder is to double click. So now in our Finder window, we're inside the Git Learning Journey folder. A quick thing to point out here is that navigating throughout the file system is an independent process in the Finder and the terminal. In other words, when I go into and out of folders in the Finder, that doesn't affect anything in the terminal and vice versa. At the moment in the Finder, I'm in the Git Learning Journey folder, but in the terminal, I am still in the home folder. So in order to go into a folder in the terminal, we're going to use another command, the cd command, which stands for change directory, and then we pass in the name of the directory we want to go into. So let's quickly see that. So we can see right now that we're in the home folder in the terminal. And now if we type in cd git learning journey, we can see that now we're in the Git Learning Journey folder. So we just saw how to go into a folder, but we also want to see how to go out of a folder. So in the file system, a single dot represents the directory you're currently in, your current directory, and double dots represent the directory before, or the parent directory. So in order to go to the previous folder, we'll use the double dots. So now we go into the terminal, we pass in cd dot dot, and we can see that we're back in the home folder. But we actually want to be in the Git Learning Journey folder, so we're going to type in cd Git Learning Journey, and now we're in the Git Learning Journey folder once again. So that's it. We've created our folder and we're inside that folder at the moment. That was it for this lesson. Let's quickly overview. In this lesson, we went over how to make a directory and how to navigate through the file system. And we also introduced the mkdir command and the cd command. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one. So in this lesson, we're going to go over creating or initializing a repository. We start the lesson having already created our project folder, which is called Git Learning Journey. And what a Git repository really is just a folder inside your project folder, and it's called .git, so actually it's a hidden folder, and it tracks all the changes to the files in your project. So the command to initialize a repository is git init, so let's see this in action. We have to be inside the folder that we want to create a repository within, and that's the Git Learning Journey folder. And we want to show all the hidden files. So I press Command-Shift dot, there's no hidden files, and in the terminal I can write ls-a, and once again, no hidden files. We only have a dot which represents the current directory and a double dot that represents the parent directory. So let's go and type git init. And here we can see that we have initialized an empty Git repository. And on the left-hand side, we can see that the .git folder was created. So now if we go into the terminal and we type ls-a again, we can see the .git folder is there. So we've created our Git repository. Now I want to make a quick note about the git init command. If you pass the name of a directory to the git init command that doesn't yet exist, then the command does two things. First, it creates the directory, and then it also initializes a Git repository within it. So let's see this in action. Let's first go and delete the project folder, and then we go into the terminal. We're in the home folder, and here we type git init, git learning journey, and we can see that on the left-hand side, the Git Learning Journey project folder was created. We go inside and we press Command-Shift dot again, and we can see the .git folder is there. And if we go to the terminal and go into our project folder, and we type in ls-a, we can see the .git folder is there as well. So now let's take a quick peek as to what's inside this .git folder. So this is a bunch of stuff which at the moment may seem like gibberish, but in the next coming lessons, we're going to go over what some of these folders and files are for. So just to quickly overview, we created a Git repository, and we learned the git init command. So thanks for watching, and see you at the next lesson. In this lesson, I'm going to go over how to add a file to our project. We start the project with our project folder and our repository, and I want to quickly distinguish between the two. So the contents of our project folder, the folders and files we find within it, are represented by something called the working directory. So the working directory is sort of like a workbench. It's where you work on your files, you edit them, you add new files, you delete files. On the other hand, our .git folder represents our repository, and I want to introduce two places within the repository. First is the staging area. So the staging area is sort of like a rough draft space. Whenever you're done working on a file in your working directory, you want to add it to your staging area, because then once you have all the files you want in the next version of your project in your staging area, you are ready to save them in the next version of your project, which is called a commit. So a commit is basically a version of your project, and each commit has a 40-character hash, which is just 40 letters and numbers, which are unique. And this hash acts like a name for the commit. It's a way to refer to it. So the commits are in something called the commit history. And in order to add a file to our repository, first we add it to our project folder, so it goes into our working directory. Then we add it to the staging area, and then it becomes a part of a commit in our commit history. So now we're ready to add our first file. I'm going to use a source code editor called Visual Studio Code. And I've decided I'm going to create a file called journey.txt, and I'm just going to add some text to it. So we open up our source code editor, open up the folder. Now we create a new file. I'm going to call it journey.txt. And on the right-hand side, you can see that this file was created. And at the moment, it's empty. There's nothing in there. We haven't added any text. So let's go and add some cheesy text. We are just starting this learning journey, exclamation point. And now if you look on the right-hand side and we look into the file, we can see that the text is there. So the file we have in our source code editor is the file that we have in our project. Awesome. So we've added a file to our working directory, but this file is not yet in our repository, so no changes to this file are being tracked yet. So now to quickly overview, in this lesson we covered adding a file to our project, and we went over terms such as the working directory, what is the staging area, and what is a commit. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one. In this lesson, I'm going to go over making our first commit. So we start off with our project folder, our repository, and one file in the project folder. Our file, however, is only in our working directory. It's not yet part of our repository, and we're not tracking any changes to it. So our first git command that we can use, which will actually tell us the state of our working directory and of our staging area, is git status. So git status will tell us the state of our working directory and our staging area, and it will let us know if there are any differences between the two. Let's see this in action. We go into the terminal, we type in git status, and we can see it tells us there's no commits yet, but there are untracked files. It also yet tells us to use git add to include in what will be committed, and it shows us our journey.txt file. So our journey.txt file is untracked, it's not yet being version controlled, and it also told us to git add in order to include in what will be committed. So what's this git add command? The git add command copies a file from the working directory into the staging area. So let's see this in action. We type in git add and pass in the name of the file. And what we just saw is on the right-hand side, an index file was created, and that's actually our staging area. So now if we type in git status, we see that there's still no commits, but now there's changes to be committed, and it's telling us we have a new file, journey.txt. So what we just saw now was our file was copied from the working directory into the staging area, and we saw that a new file was created called index. And index represents the staging area. They are the same thing, and those two terms can be used interchangeably. So now, if we're happy with all the files that we have in our staging area, and those are the ones that we want to save in our next version of our project or in our next commit, then we're ready to make our commit. It's important to note that commit is actually a verb and a noun. So to commit something is to save something, and a commit means a version of our project. So the command to make a commit is git commit-m, and then you pass in a message, usually making some sort of comment about the changes that you made. So what the git commit command is going to do is it's going to take a snapshot of your staging area, and then it's going to assign a hash to the commit it's going to make from that snapshot. And it's also good to know that you don't need all 40 of the characters in that hash. You only need a few of the first ones to refer to your commit, usually about 7. So let's see this in action. We go into the terminal, we type in git commit-m, we pass in a message. Here I'm saying adding first file. And here we can see the hash, 183D64F. These are the first 7 characters of the hash. And if we go into our .git folder, I want to show you the objects folder because that's actually where all our commits are. That's actually what represents the commit history. So what we just did now is we took a snapshot of the staging area and we created our commit, which has the hash 183D64F. So now to overview. In this lesson, we made our first commit, and we used commands such as git status, git add, and git commit. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one. In this lesson, I'm going to go over working with an existing project. So you can see that I have a folder called Novel and 4 files inside, each representing a chapter. Let's go into that folder in the terminal. So we're inside the folder now, and we can see that if we type git status, it tells us that this project is not a repository. We're not tracking any of the changes to these files at the moment. So here we have our working directory with our 4 files. And what we want to do is we want to initialize a repository so we can track all the changes to these files. So I go into the Finder and I press Command-Shift-Dot to show any hidden files. And then I git init, and here we have our repository. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to start tracking all the files in this project folder. So we want to make an initial commit with all the files. We can use the git add command, and we can actually pass in a directory to this command. And if you recall from a previous lesson, a single dot represents our current directory. So we're going to pass in the single dot to the git add command. We can first do git status, which will tell us that none of these files are being tracked. And then we can git add dot, which adds all these files to the staging area. So now if we write git status, we can see that all these files are in our staging area and they're ready to be committed. Now let's just go and make our commit. We type git commit -m, pass in our message. Mine's just initial commit. And we can see it gives us our commit hash. And if we type git status again, we can see that our working tree is clean. So there we go, there's our commit. But now let's assume that we want to make some changes to our 3rd and our 4th chapters. So we go to those files and we make some changes. And we save those changes on our computer. So now we have a new version, an updated version of these files. And now the working directory and the staging area, the files in each of them are different. And the git status command will tell us this. So we go into the terminal, we type in git status, and we can see that it warns us about this different in the version of the file in our working directory than in our staging area. So let's add these updated files to the staging area. We go in, we write git add dot, and now if we type git status, it tells us that it has updated files that it's ready to commit. So there we go. But what if we now decided that we actually don't want to add all the changes that we made to chapter 4, and we actually want to unstage that file and take it out of the staging area? We can do this using the git reset command, typing head -- and then the name of the file. So let's see that. We go in the terminal, we type in git status. We can see that we have these updated files, but now we decide to take chapter4.txt out of the staging area. And there, we've unstaged that file. Now we type git status, and we can see that in our next commit, we'd only include the updated version of the chapter 3 file. So there we go. So this goes to show that we can move things in and out of our staging area. And that's why in a previous lesson, I'd referred to it as a rough draft space, because you can really decide what you want to include in the next commit or the next version of your project. So now, if we're happy with all the files we've added to our staging area, then we're ready to commit. So let's do our commit. Git commit -m, pass in the message. Here I'm just going to say updates to chapter 3. It gives us our commit hash, and we can see our commit in our commit history. So now just to overview, in this lesson we covered tracking an existing project and removing files from the staging area. And we also showed one use of the git reset command. That was it for this lesson. See you at the next one.